The warmest of greetings to you, and welcome to Happily Ever Teaching. In this podcast, we help you enthrall your learners in every subject under the sun using the best teaching method known to science, storytelling. To do this, we feature special guest educators who are passionately keen for your children to become amazing and successful human beings. I am storyteller Chip Cahoon, and with me this week is...
Toria Bono. I am a Year 4 teacher in a large junior school on the South Coast, and I am the host of the podcast Tiny Voice Talks.
And I'm Helen. I'm a teacher currently in a mixed reception Year 1 class, teaching in Buckinghamshire.
And today we are exploring English learning outcomes with a stupendously silly folktale from Russia. You can listen to the story by downloading our sister podcast, Fables and Fairy Tales, or search our website, epictales.co.uk, for The Fish in the Forest. There you'll find a video of me telling the story that you can share with your children. And if you sign up as an Epic Educator, you'll also get a copy as an ebook or paperback illustrated by the magnificent Mario Coelho, as well as the full audiobook for you to download at any time. There are even some tips there for telling the story yourself, and a whole heap of resources to go with the lesson ideas we're about to discuss, as well as extra lesson ideas that we maybe didn't have time to fit into this podcast. Right now, though, let's continue our discussion with Helen and Toria here as we move on to the English learning outcomes that the farmer is going to dig up from his turnip patch. Let's start with you, Helen, with ages 4 to 7, the early end of the school. What did you find among the turnips and the treasure?
I found a couple of sort of longer English projects in this story, one of which is directly relating to turnips. So I'll start with that one. Like I say, this is more of a whole project, really. It's more of a children stepping into character project, but with lots of writing opportunities. So I thought it would be fun to set your children up as turnip farmers because, I mean, why not? So there's a lot of cross-curricular links, which I'll talk about at other times to do with DT and food and turnips and growing and science. But in terms of the literacy, if the children are going to become turnip farmers and they're going to sell turnips, probably ones that you've made, created through art or you bought from a shop, because in terms of actually growing turnips, that's more than a year long project. That's going to make it a very long project. It's going to make a very long project. But the children could learn what a turnip farmer does. And then they become those turnip farmers, and they set the classroom up as a turnip farm and a turnip shop, a lovely organic turnip farm shop, very exclusive, very specific, just turnips. And then you've got opportunities for the children to write jobs lists of what they need to do each day, of putting up posters advertising their turnips, using some lovely language to persuade people that their turnips are the best turnips in the county or the country. You can write down turnip recipes. You can make a little turnip recipe book. You can write a diary, the day in the life of a turnip farmer. I just thought there were lots of opportunities. Like I say, this would involve quite a lot of commitment from you as a teacher to turn this into a whole turnip project. But I thought it would be quite engaging for the children and something a bit different, and lots of little writing opportunities out of that, very, very purposeful writing, which I like to do. Set up a turnip shop, you're labeling the shelves, you're making the door sign, you're putting leaflets through people's doors.
And by doing this, you're also potentially getting children excited about eating turnips, which is something that I don't think many grown-ups would say their children are excited about eating. So you never know, you might be helping their nutritional intake at the same time.
Absolutely. It's a project with many, many benefits.
And they might start understanding some of the jokes in Blackadder as well. So many turnip jokes in that series.
So there's two other slightly different, not quite so involved English-based projects. One is to do with the 3 tricks in the story. This is a really, really good story for children to adapt to make their own. So a lot of the story writing that I do in early years and Key Stage 1 is taking familiar stories and just changing 1 or 2 little bits. So if it's Jack and the Beanstalk, you turn it into Tom and the Giant Sunflower or something like that. So you keep the main elements of the story. You get children to know the story well, and you adapt it. And this is a perfect story for that, because you've got the 3 tricks.
Yes, yeah.
And you've told the story to the children. They've learnt it well. They've become very invested in the story because it's a wonderful story. And then you say to them, so what? Imagine if you were the turnip farmer, what would you buy from the market and what would you do with it? And there are really very few wrong answers for this. So the children they could be really creative.
Exactly.
And make the story their own. And then you create their own story map. You could use an actual map of the forest where they're going to put the different items. And then children retell and write the story themselves. If you're in year 2, they can write their version of the whole story. In year 1, I'd probably have them just writing that section of the story with the 3 tricks. And in reception, mainly oral storytelling, apart from very, very confident writers that might be ready to do some story writing.
Well, you can usually go from one to the other if you've got young ones who are really excited about doing the oral side, and then say to them, oh, that was such a great story. We should make sure we save that forever and ever and ever. Of course, writing is the best way to do that. So it's a wonderful way to motivate your young learners into writing.
Absolutely. If a story is theirs, and if they own a story, they will want to write a story.
Exactly.
And then the final link that I found, just a little link, is to the story of the enormous turnip.
Yes, yeah.
I thought that was just a little link that you can bring in there and use that story however you like. The storytelling and looking at the characters and acting it out, which we all love to do with the enormous turnip, and again make their own version of the story.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've got an example for adjusting that story with the Oxford Owls' big carrot, as they call it.
Of course, yes.
Which I know quite well, because that's the one I'm always recognised for when I go into to schools. Yeah, I'm always, oh, come on, Chip, give us your big carrot. I really wish they had thought of a different title for it, but there you go. Tori, as we go up towards the ages 7 to 11, what did you unpick for us?
So I mentioned in the PSHC podcast the fact that actually this really lends itself, this story, to prediction. And from the offset, the blade of his spade hit something hard. Well, what was it? What potentially had it hit? So actually, right from the very beginning, you can really get your young people to unpick, and potentially you've got lots of writing opportunities, but also lots of oracy opportunities. So you could get them to write a small paragraph about what they think he may have hit, or just actually have a conversation about it. Then again, the items in the market, it's not obvious to start with what he's going to do with these items. So you're not quite sure what he's going to do with the bread and the silverfish and the sausages. You just don't know. So actually, again, you could get them to write, you could get them to talk about what they think he is going to do with these items. What would they do with them? Could they come up with a different version for the story at that point? And would their version work? So actually, I think that's a real linchpin, that bit, what he manages to do and why he does it. But it's not obvious at that point, because there was no way at that point, I guess that's what he was going to do. That sounds really bizarre.
No, I know what you mean.
You know what I mean?
No way that we're going to predict what he was going to do and why as well.
And why,
Even when he'd done them, it was still...
what did you do?
Where is this going? Why are there sausages in the river?
Yeah, but then he walks it through. You're still thinking, I'm not sure. But it's...
There's that moment, isn't there, at the end where he goes back and he's finished taking his wife around the forest, and you think, so he's just distracted her, so she's got something else to talk about.
Yes.
But no, she still goes and talks about the gold.
And that was it. And I was sure I'd figured it at that point, that's what he was doing. He was just going to... It was really, really interesting. But that's just 2 examples of prediction. But I think there are a number of different things you could actually get discussion points or writing points depending on what you wanted your young people to do. I also thought it was a great springboard for a whole topic on storytelling, because it finishes at the end with retell this story, basically.
Yes.
And I thought, so similar to what Helen was saying, it is a fabulous story to rewrite your own version of. I'm passionate about Taught for Writing, which is very, very much about, you have your innovations, and your innovations can be quite simple, they can be quite complex, but I think this is a great story that you can innovate in your own way. But what I was thinking is, initially, just to build up that storytelling skill, which is such a skill, they could actually retell this story. Because I think it's really important, retelling isn't just about telling the story, but it's telling the story with, as you know, only too well, Chip, with expression, with engagement, really bringing your listener in so that they are fully and utterly engaged, which is not easy to do. So I think there's a lot of teaching within that, but I also think that really impacts on oracy, which is something we need absolutely at the moment in schools. So I was thinking that they could start off by retelling this story and then actually write their own versions and retell those. And then I was thinking, funnily enough, I did think about the giant turnip. I couldn't help it. But I was thinking, actually, there are so many different ways they could go with just retelling stories and just practicing retelling and storytelling, and maybe hearing a story from one another and then passing that story on. So that was sort of, I thought there are so many different ways you could go with that, but you could actually allow this to move into a whole storytelling theme.
Which is the positive side of the gossip that we spoke about yesterday as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, that then leads me on to my final thing, which is, as you know, I do like a good debate. And so I found this really interesting research on gossip. And in this research, it actually points out that sometimes gossip can be a good thing, like that feeling that one has when they're chatting over the garden fence, because it actually brings you together with someone, but it gives you that feeling of just connection as such. So it talks about this in the article. It also talks about, where gossip isn't so great and so on. And, in the PSHC episode, we talked about secrets sometimes being a good thing, sometimes being a bad thing, and so on, and when we need to be careful with them. Now, I just thought it'd be a really interesting debate, is gossip a good thing? And actually get them to consider the evidence before them with regards to the article, with regards to, other information, and actually put their side of the argument across. So those are my three ideas, because I do think we can be very, very black and white with no gossip is bad. But actually, is it more of a grey area?
Absolutely. Yeah. And its relationship with storytelling and how reality morphs into the characters of stories. So, big men and women become giants, and particularly nasty people become, wizards and witches and all sorts of things like that. So, it can be a very fascinating investigation to go into your debate there.
On the planning sheet, I've put the link to that article for anyone that wants to use that with their Key Stage 2.
Yes, thanks, Toria. As Toria just mentioned there, folks, Epic educators can get that planning sheet with all these lesson ideas and the extra resources to go with them, such as links to the other materials we've been discussing. So please do head to epictales.co.uk to find out more about becoming an Epic educator. But for this episode, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. If you'd like to talk to us about anything you've heard in this podcast, or if there's a subject you're soon to teach that you'd like us to cover, you can find us on social media using @TeachHappily, or leave us a review using your favourite podcast app. Please also share this podcast with your colleagues and help us start a story-led revolution in classrooms around the world, so children everywhere can learn in a way that's effective, memorable and enjoyable all at the same time. Tomorrow, the farmer and his wife will help us teach maths. But right now, it only remains for us to say cheerio, and we hope to hear your story soon. So, cheerio! And we hope to hear your story soon.